Urban. How you pronounce it in Flemish?
Well, in fact, it's a French name, Urbain.
Urbain, okay.
Which in fact means somebody from the urbs in Latin, from the city. So it's in fact a citizen, Urbain.
A citizen. So your grandfather, Urban, he was born at the end of 19th century, and his childhood and adolescence, when we read the book, it was the moment of Europe starting to shake, isn't it? So do you think that today we have a sort of like 1905 version? Do you see those parallels with the beginning, the very beginning of 20th century?
That depends on a very interesting and difficult discussion, whether we believe that things can repeat in history. You might know the beautiful word of Karl Marx saying, history first comes as a tragedy and then as a comedy. Yeah. So we never know whether tragedies will repeat in the same way. We only know that we are living in a time where you recognize scenarios. In Belgium there's almost a sort of, let's say, sort of discussion on the issue whether you can compare the rise of right-wing Europe now with the 30s.
Same here.
Of course, every right-wing politician says,
no,
those leftist people, they're crazy, of course there's no repetition, etc. We've got nothing to do with it. From the left progressive side, people say, don't you see the sign of the times? So if you ask me if we live the same thing, no, of course not. It will not be in the same way. But we're definitely living in a time of tectonic plates that we can feel, all of us. And the tectonic plates are maybe not shoving as much between, for instance, a clash of civilizations or that sort of things. But our attitude towards what is democracy, what is free will, what is the collectivity, what is politics and what do politicians do for us. So the questions we're asking go to the fundamentals and the roots of the society such as we, certainly in the west of Europe, have made it since the Second World War, which we call the social liberal democracies, which guarantee me freedom, also of undertaking, etc. But at the same time try to take care of the weak in society. Solidarity and egoism going together. We see that this system now is balancing and that we don't know whether the system can protect us in the first place from the neoliberal market problematics, in the second place from the cultural problems we have, migration. So this is of course a tectonic sort of shift we're living. Yeah.
So what are your hopes for the future? What are your, do you have any clue how it's going to be here? I mean, are we going to find a solution?
I wouldn't use the word hope, but I try to be on the optimistic side.
Really?
Because I think optimism is the most pragmatic thing. Pessimism is not practical. Pessimism ruins the chances, ruins the dialogues, and optimism is a world opening to itself. Jeremy Corbyn was giving a speech last Saturday on the great festival of Glastonbury.
Was he there? Oh. Yeah.
And there he said, what we all hope will be, listen, we are the many and they are the few. There's a minority that tries to incite us to hatred and anxiety. And what we have to do is to stay calm, not get hysterical, and believe in the dialogue and the integration. There's no possibility for us, no chance to move backwards. Yeah. We cannot go back to a world that's not there anymore. Don't believe populism in that way. We have to move forward, and it's the only pragmatical thing to do. So if you would call that hope, fine to me, but hope is a cloud. And being pragmatist, being active as a citizen, talking as loud as you can about being just a spontaneous person, and try to live in your own street, in your own quarter of the city, with the people who are there, and not closing yourself down, living democracy every day for yourself as you can. As a citizen and as an artist or whatever you are, I think that's the way we should move. And politicians are always people who come behind us. We think they go in front of us, they're not. Because they want our vote, they look what we are doing. Yeah. And if we are a mass saying we want this open world, we want Europe to be progressive and open-minded and tolerant, they will have to follow us, don't forget that. That's also democracy. They try to deny us very often. We have very many corruption scandals in Belgium now, which shock everybody, that our politicians, even those that call themselves progressive and socialist, are the greatest egotists, are corrupted in a way you would never believe. We see that we can win from them if we continue bringing out the scandals and say, you has come, you promised us with our vote to take care of the people, and you do not. So I have to be, in a sort of activist way, positive, because it's more practical.
And how do you, Belgium Flemish people, how do you consider yourself in today's Europe, in today's European Union?
You mean we as Belgians?
Yeah.
There are two ways to look at Belgium. As a positive way, also in a negative way. The negative way is to say Belgium is a sort of artificial state that was created in the 19th century to keep France and Germany apart, sort of buffer state. And it will never work because one of those peoples is Latin culture, the other is Germanic culture. That's a lie, because it was already a mixed culture in the 10th, 11th century. Then already people were speaking French and Flemish, etc. So it has always been like that, and Belgium is only the affirmation of a border identity.
Yeah.
And I very much like that border identity, and that a negative story becomes the positive story. One of my colleagues has said at a certain moment as a sort of slogan, Europe will have to become Belgian or it will not exist. You will have to live with the identities of the others. You will have to learn to live your own identity, not as my identity is my identity, but my identity is my difference with the others, and I have to accept the difference. In all of these ways, I think Belgium is very interesting still. It will not split, I guess, because it's technically almost impossible. But we are, of course, in the hub. We are called Brussels, and Brussels is the guilt of everything.
That's right.
I live near Brussels, and we're not guilty of anything. We're just in the same system, which is the European Union. And we have the advantages, as you people have in Poland, and we have the disadvantages, as you people have. So we'll have to choose what we do. But if we step back out of the unionizing and the union of Europe, what do we have left? A patchwork again of antagonistic nationalistic identities? Is that the future we dream of in a globalized world where airplanes are all over the planet? It's impossible. So also there, we in Belgium have to move forward. But there are very strong regressive tendencies as well. We have nationalists selling themselves as progressive. They want to get rid of an old-fashioned nation state, so to say. We know that sort of discourse. But in fact, they are moving backwards because they again want to formulate identity as a clear-cut thing, whatever. And this will be impossible in the future world. So also Belgium has to think about its own future as Europe has to think about its own future.
So do we. Timothy Snyder, he calls the exact place we are here now the Bloodlands. The trauma of Second World War here in Poland is very, very strong, and somehow it covers the trauma of the First World War. And I think that the Western world has a different view on this tragedy of the First World War. Let me remind you, for instance, this beautiful exhibition in London, the Tower of London fulfilled with poppy flowers, each one for one British soldier died in the war. How do you feel about that moment? How do you feel what's your remembrance of that very moment?
You mean talking about the First World War?
Yes.
Of course I have no remembrance, I wasn't there, yes, but I have commemoration.
Yeah.
I read a very beautiful sentence in the Jewish Museum here in Krakow yesterday. Somebody listening to a witness becomes a witness. When I was writing the book about my grandfather's memoirs as a soldier in the First World War trenches, I became a witness because he was a witness. And in Belgium we have repressed the memory of the First World War partly because of the fact that everybody's talking about the Second World War. But for our country, certainly for Belgium, the First World War was far more tragical because it was a war crime, a German war crime in attacking us. We were neutral, we had nothing to do with the question. But we were crushed, unprepared. When the Second World War came, Belgium was still trying to recover from what had happened. And our king in the Second World War, to Hitler, he surrendered, which is considered by very many people as a sort of cowardice, but he had no other choice. The country was ruined still. It was only 20 years further. But what we had is that some Flemish intellectuals collaborated with the Germans, which is high treason, because they hoped to get rid from a francophone state as Belgium, where they felt despised. And that was true. But collaborating with an enemy attacking your country is not the good way to try to solve your internal problems. So after the war, there came revenge, etc. And let's say that what started in the First World War in Belgium as the self-conscious of the Flemish population to say, we have to have our own rights. Yeah. We have to have our own part of the country where we can live in our own culture as a self-evidence, was contaminated by the collaboration. So this means that still in Flanders, the whole question of how you behave when you're a Fleming is still very complex and still very vulnerable as a discussion and sensible. That means that for me, writing the story of my grandfather in the First World War was trying to understand the roots of the debates which are still coloring our society. And when you ask me how I live it through now that I've written this book, I think it is the first step up to the political situation we have now, which is very complex and sensitive, unstable, but learns us democracy. Democracy is not a stable thing. Democracy is an unstable thing. And if you want to be Democrats, you have to live with the past in the first place, like you people have to do here, which is not simple. And in the second place, it means that with this instability, you try to see it as a laboratory for how you behave in politics, in social matters, etc. In this way, I think that we in Flanders have repressed, in literature for instance, we have suppressed the memory of the First World War. We had no great novels on it. Other peoples had. I mean, the Germans had, the French had, the British had. The Flemish had kept silent about it. We knew it, there were some books at the time, but not novels like mine that tell people our part of the mosaic, what has happened in Flanders. So this works in a double way. In the first place, it shows the world, look, this is what happened to us in the First World War, and draw your own conclusion of what you think the present is now looking at alike. But in the second place, it has taught us as Flemish that we had suppressed certain things and that we have to live up the historical moments every day again. There's not one interpretation. Yeah. There's not one moment that you can say, okay, now Poland knows what has happened. Or Warsaw knows what it has to do with its traumatic past of the 40s. No, with every generation you need a new lecture. We have to keep on reading history. That's the only way to exercise democracy.
That's right. It's beautiful. Let's change the subject for a moment. I would like to talk about music, because your books are really full of music, and of course we're starting from David Bowie sometimes, but on the other hand there's plenty of Baroque music. Why this music? Why Baroque? And do you listen a lot to the music? Is music present in your life?
Yes, I'm an omni-devouring eclectic monster.
Oh, right.
In music, I listen as well to jazz, as to pop music, as to classical music, as to world music. I've played music myself when I was younger. I was not good enough to continue.
But what was that?
I played jazz guitar.
Oh, really?
My brother has become a fantastic musician, really very high level, international. So then I knew I should not continue. It was far better. But of course, I have the notions of music. And when you have notions of music, genres do not matter.
Yeah.
But the fact that music is good matters. For instance, I'm quoting David Bowie's Hedon. which is for me one of the finest albums ever made by somebody who's already a genius. If you see the philosophical side of the music, if you see how it is made in the studio, what an intelligence there is in making it, to me there's no difference with good Baroque music. And of course I play a game with music in this book, which is about paranoia. It's about neurotic subjects in this world. When you drive your car and you're somewhere in a traffic jam, you hear music all the time. And we all know that listening to music in your car is very vehement. Far more vehement and intense than at home.
That's right.
It just jumps at you because you're in a sort of bubble. And then we start thinking about our lives, don't we? And we try self-correcting and think, I didn't do this as I should have done it. I'm thinking I'm going to take that decision. So it's very important that we do that. And that's why I wanted it as a red line through the book. And at a certain moment I thought, because this is a book on globalization and the paranoia of globalization, terrorism is globalized, ecological problems are globalized, and music is globalized. Those are three things with their own problem fields that are globalized. And I very often think, now, if Bach could come back and see what happens to his music, millions and billions of people at the same moment on this planet listening to his music, while when he died he thought he was, you know, old-fashioned and would be forgotten. And I thought, we are living in a very strange, fascinating world. We all listen to David Bowie, to Madonna, to U2, etc., and to Bach and Beethoven, and to jazz musicians, to Miles Davis, etc. We share this, but we share it while we're alone. If you could look into all those cars in the traffic jams, we're sharing things, but we don't know we're sharing it. With apps, you can share them better now. Yeah. But we're living in a world where we share things and where we're alone at the same time. And that's one of the motives of the book. This John de Vuist, who in fact is Johann Faust, tries to understand the world as Faust wanted to, and he forgets about love. And music is that thing that makes us think about love again. So if you see the terrorism in the book, and music, they're the great antagonists for me. Yeah.
And what do you listen to now? I mean, for instance, in your iPhone, what do you have on your...
I'm listening to all sort of things for the moment, but let me think. It's so eclectic that for the moment I'm again in a period of adoring string quartets. Oh. I think string quartets are one of the finest, most marvelous inventions of the human mind for compositional reasons, etc.
So do you have any soundtrack for Warsaw? Let me be precise. Do you have anything like that?
No, not exactly. No.
Oh?
You mean if for me music is bound to a certain spot?
Yeah.
No, music is like the airplane. It takes you all around.
Okay.
No, absolutely not. For the rest, I'm listening again to some older jazz records, which I remembered because my brother was talking about it. I'm listening again very much to John Coltrane. He was a real prophet. The older I get, the more I like to get back to the decisional moments in history where something completely new happened.
I see.
And that's the way I listen to new pop music, for instance, too. Saying, is there a paradigmatic shift, or is there something happening that we haven't heard before? Then it interests me.
Mm-hmm. And one more thing, in the book you're mentioning once Pope Leon the 13th and his Rerum Novarum encyclic. And I was wondering, what's your opinion on Pope Francis? Is he, does he remind you a bit of Leon the 13th and this ability to catch the moment and to...
Well, let's say he's a bit the Vatican version of Obama. Right? He installed hope. You can see that he has a psychological empathy of a great leader. A great leader is not only somebody who can play chess on the world checkerboard, it's also somebody who has some sort of wisdom in him. And you see, this is a wise man. He knows what he's doing. Of course, he's tied and bound by the clergy, which is terribly conservative. And we will see how it plays out. And we don't know whether it will emancipate the church. After 8 years of Obama and hope, and the best of America, now we have the worst of America with Trump. So dialectics can be negative, you never know. But he has my sympathy, certainly. And I think he's a diplomat too. He knows that if he moves too fast, it will crumble down. But we hope that he will give more rights. I hope that during his pontificate, we will see women priests, for instance, that we will see this eternal stupid discussion about gay rights being settled, that he will speak out louder still against pedophilia in the church, and that he may bring some sense of religion to people that inspires democracy. Because you know, religion is an empty tool. You can inspire hatred with it, I can use it as a knife to kill you, and I can use it as something to embrace you. So it's empty. In itself, religion is empty. How many values it says it triggers, people do with it what they want, because it's based on old texts. And those old texts need to be translated by intelligent people, not by stupid people. That's the whole problem of religion. I myself, I'm like Madonna. I'm not religious, but I feel very moved. So I see that in religion there are certain values that can help us in democracy, like empathy, etc., compassion, humanistic values. So in this regard, whether I believe or not is not important. The question is, what can you deal with in religion to help this make a world where you do the only thing you have to do on earth, lower the suffering, lower the degree of suffering and hatred and pain and dollar for people. How can you do that? If you do it with religion, fine to me. If you do it with humanistic values, if you think enlightenment will do it, fine to me. But try to lower the aggression, the hysteria, and the adrenaline. If you can lower the adrenaline in the world, I think it would work well. And we've lived in a world where since, certainly in Western Europe, since the 60s, adrenaline is the only good thing. But adrenaline is not only a good thing. Adrenaline is also something
connected with
evil.
Violence, yes.
Yes, which has to do with violence. So we have to rethink those things, and maybe a good way of dealing with religious values can help us in that. So I'm not sectarian. Again, I try to be pragmatical with things.
Pragmatics, yeah. And just for the end, because I think I'm the last journalist that is talking with you today. What impressions are you taking from Poland, from Warsaw, from all those meetings you've had?
Well, I must say, of course, I came with a certain opinion in your country.
Well, yeah.
Because I read newspapers and you believe them.
Oh, yeah.
You see? Yeah, so we come to Poland and we think Kaczynski. And we think problems. But what I see here is very hopeful. It's an open society of citizens like I know them in my country. And what is very hopeful to me is that I see here the same sort of people I put my hope in Belgium. And this is the Europe of the future. It's your generation. In my generation, there are very many people I'm ashamed of. The baby boomers are like wanton children. They have had the best times and they want to keep it and get everybody out. You know, the Brexiteers are baby boomers, etc. There's a lot of bile and sour feelings in society. And what I see here is that also you people, you think, you believe in art, you want to move forward. And that's very hopeful.
Let's hope you're right. Thank you.
You have to keep up the good thing.
Thank you very much. Thank you.